If you're just getting started out with looking for therapy, or you're already doing one kind of therapy and now you've heard about some other acronym and you're just wondering where to go and what to do, I know it can get really confusing with all the acronyms, so I figured I'd make this video to explain a bit about CBT, ERP, ACT, DBT, what all these acronyms, how they all kind of fit together. Obviously, the best way to explain anything is with donuts, so I'm going to explain this with donuts. The first thing you should probably know, some of you have already figured this out, the title for this video doesn't make any sense. Exposure and response prevention, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, they're all cognitive behavioral therapies. They're all CBT. Asking if ERP is better than CBT or ACT is better than CBT is kind of like asking, is weightlifting better than exercising? It doesn't really make sense. CBT just tells us that that type of therapy involves cognitive, so stuff in our heads, and behavioral, ways of acting elements. Right? So we're changing stuff in our heads, we're changing stuff in our behaviors outside of our heads. That's all that it tells us. So CBT, I got our donuts right here. CBT is our plain basic donut. Things like this are donuts. Saying I do CBT is like saying I eat donuts. It's round, it's sweet, it's got cognitive, it's got behavioral elements, it's a donut, it's a CBT. I like to use the plain donut too because old school CBT in some ways is this attempt to make these kind of plain, very rational brains. That, if you're having anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, whatever, we're going to see them as irrational, and then we're going to come up with these ways to show the brain the better, kind of more rational routes. We're going to get rid of that stuff. We're going to solve anxiety, all of those kinds of things. So all of those human experiences, kind of the toppings of life, we're not going to have them there. We're going to create this rational plain donut. However, a couple years later, some researcher was like, hey, we could put chocolate on top of that donut. Also, maybe all of these feelings aren't so bad. Some could be useful. What if we did particularly targeted cognitive behavioral exercises around things like fear and anxiety so that people could learn how to handle those? Which leads us to our ERP donut. So the plain donut, but now we're going to say, okay, we can add some emotions in there. Maybe pushing into emotions and letting them be there isn't so bad. For a long time, donuts were kind of like this. Maybe a sugar donut, a chocolate donut, apple fritter, that kind of thing. Just kind of plain donuts. So a little bit of variation, but nothing too wild. It reminds me of the era when I was a kid, where we used to just only have those kind of plain donuts. I remember my grandparents, when they would come and visit, sometimes they would pass through a town where there was this donut shop called a Baker's Dozen. And if you bought a dozen donuts, they gave you 13 donuts. And I remember my grandparents would come up and it would just be a plain white box. The thing was though, when you opened that donut box, there would be this puff of cigarette smoke because the stores back then, of course, you could smoke in them. The donut shops were more like cubes full of cigarette smoke that also had donuts. And CBT and ERP come from this same era. Things back then were a bit different than they are now. I think this is really important to keep in mind because we naturally expect other areas to progress and change. But it's still very common that you might see therapists practicing therapy from the era when people could smoke in donut shops and donuts all smelled like cigarette smoke. Therapists used to smoke in sessions, doctors did. And the therapist was smoking, and the patient smoking anxiously. And the therapist, I'm going to tell you about ERP. So, you're going to write out the things you hate 20,000 times, and then you're going to be anxious, expose yourself to that anxiety, and then you habituate. Done. No more anxiety. Get out of here. Right? Classic therapy. Things change. We don't do physical fitness now like we did back in the 80s and 90s. We don't do donuts now like we did back in the 80s and 90s. And we don't do therapy now like we did back in the 80s and 90s. And the classics are still great. Right? There is nothing wrong with those classic donuts, with all of the things we've learned through the classic forms of therapy. But it's so important to keep in mind that we keep evolving, we keep developing, we keep learning. And things like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, are a product of what's known as the third wave. That's where we get donuts like this. Ooh, ooh, oh yeah. Let's get a therapy close-up here. Oh yeah, look at that. So a way of seeing the three waves of CBT is that wave one is you're playing basic skills. Just recognizing for the first time that, oh, you need to do behavioral and cognitive changes when you're working on recovery from mental illness. And then wave two was your targeted exercises. So we're saying, okay, well, we're gonna push into some of these experiences. We're gonna have maybe one topic. And then wave three, not only have we improved on the basic fundamentals of CBT, we've got a more robust, like just the donut, the plain donut itself here is more delicious and more resilient, able to handle more things because we've learned more. We've also got great bakers who were once donut eaters. We've got donut connoisseurs becoming bakers. Right? We know so much more. We talk openly so much more about the therapy donuts that we're eating. But also notice the huge difference is the toppings. Whereas with original old school CBT, it was really about, hey, we're gonna use these to get rid of these irrational thoughts, these feelings, etc. We're gonna fight all this stuff and get rid of it. Now we recognize that you can have all of the toppings in life, that in many ways, trying to avoid and control those experiences was actually not that helpful. It was part of the problem. So you could say one of the fundamental differences between older school CBT and something like ACT or DBT is that they now make space for all of the human experience. Sometimes people refer to these as more mindfulness-based therapies, right? They're saying we're not going to judge and try to control and get rid of those experiences. They can be there. Let's now learn how to eat all of these delicious experiences that we can have in life. Before we wrap up, I want to cover two really important things that these donuts can teach us about therapy. So if you're looking to get into therapy, keep this in mind. This donut right here, this plain donut, this old school CBT donut, it actually might be really, really delicious. The baker who made this might have incredible skill. This ACT and DBT donut over here, actually you may bite into it and it's not very good. It does matter who bakes your donuts. Just because a therapist went to school to learn how to bake a particular type of donut, that doesn't mean that they are actually good at baking that type of donut. Certifications are great. All of these donuts here, all of them came from kitchens that were certified by the government. That's fantastic. I mean, that is wonderful. I'm really glad none of these donuts were made in like rat-infested kitchens. Great. But that doesn't actually tell us about the quality of the donuts. There's probably around you lots of restaurants that have all been certified as A-OK restaurants. But that doesn't mean the food they make is delicious. And that is 100% true with therapists as well. So shop for mental health support the same way you shop for donuts. Frequently. Talking to people about what you're looking for, checking out reviews, reading books. You know, if they have a book on how to bake your own donuts at home and you find that works really well, you're probably going to like that therapist, that baker, right? So ask around, talk to people about it. Just because somebody says they do CBT or they do ERP or that they do ACT or DBT does not mean anything about the quality of the support and the skills they are going to give you. The second really important thing to keep in mind with therapy, and I didn't believe this at first either when I first heard it, but donuts aren't magic. I know it's really weird and difficult to wrap your head around. But, and again, suspend disbelief here for a second. If I eat this donut, it's not going to magically solve all of my problems, but it'll probably solve most of them. But the same is true with therapy. So if you go to a therapist, that therapist can give you donuts, that therapist can give you mental health skills, but that's only to fuel you doing the amazing things you want to do in life. You still have to go and do those things. Because if I eat this entire box of donuts, I'm going to eat this entire box of donuts. I then have all this great fuel to go and do the things I really care about in my life, to do the things that I value. Right? This is energy to then take action. And mental health skills therapy are exactly the same. They are only providing us with fuel for doing really awesome, really great things in life. Saying something like, oh, I tried ACT, all this accepting thoughts and doing things you value, and it didn't work, is like saying, I tried eating a Cinnamon Toast Crunch donut and it didn't work. False. Whether I'm nourishing myself with an entire box of donuts, which is awesome, or I'm nourishing myself with mental health skills that I can get from so many different places, also incredibly awesome. It's about taking that nourishment and using it as fuel for action. And so important to have that perspective when we embark on this journey. We're not going to somebody and say, hey, give me a donut and fix all my problems. Hey, tell me something that's going to solve all of these feelings I want to get rid of. That's not what it's about. It's really about tapping in to nourishment for ourselves to then do the awesome things we want to do in this world. And so I hope for you, whatever you happen to be nourishing yourself with today, I hope it is wonderful fuel for doing all of the awesome things you want to do in life.